Welcome back for another exciting episode of Leader Brand Yourself Insights. And I am so excited to have Alice Quan, design leader, with me here today. Alice Quan has had a rich and storied career at multiple tech firms, including startups and also global well-known cloud companies. Alice's current position is at GoFundMe. And, Alice even holds one of the first patents for AI assisted design. And so I just wanted to invite Alice on today to talk about how brand has inspired Alice throughout her career. And in particular, the topic we're going to focus on today is, what does it mean to be unapologetically you? So welcome, Alice. Tell me, what does it mean to you to be unapologetically you? How would you define that?
First of all, I love the phrase unapologetically you. And I also just want to thank you for having me on today. It's a real honor, and I'm excited to chat about this topic. In terms of what does it mean to me, unapologetically you is showing up to a podcast in your fuzzy cashmere sweater and your rose quartz crystal necklace at 7:10 a.m. I jokingly say that, but I think the way that I would describe it is that many of us walk into a room, maybe potentially in fear. And I've learned really the hard way, actually, that I need to walk into a room confidently me, which
I
means
love that.
you have power, you have strengths, you have a voice, and you have something to contribute to the conversation. And don't be afraid of that.
I love that. And I think when I work with clients, one of the things I love about the concept of brand is that those elements that you just spoke about, really comprise a strong brand. And so when leaders think about and are proactive about building a brand and actually developing that brand and writing that brand down, having a brand book for themselves, those things, I think we can stay in those things for ourselves more easily because we're being thoughtful and we're being intentional.
100%.
So you're writing a book called Make Way. I love that title. Tell me a little bit about the book and how does that feed into this whole theme of unapologetically you?
So this is a passion project. It's definitely I've realized it's something that's been kind of brewing in me for decades.
Yep.
Ruminating maybe is another word. Uh, I would say that in a lot of ways, I've spent my entire life focusing on building products, solving complex problems, managing teams from globally across all these different time zones. And Make Way actually came to me a year ago, and it was this epiphany moment after using a ton of different types of frameworks uh, in my leadership, management, and people philosophy that sort of surfaced in its own way. And it's around mapping how you design your own life of meaning uh, as we align passion, purpose, power, and prosperity. And instead of drifting into our purpose, we're designing our purpose.
Fantastic. I love that. Can you share a moment in your career when being unapologetically you felt a little risky, but ultimately paid off?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'd almost say that that's fairly recent for me. I joined GoFundMe about 3 months ago, and I would say it was a big a big jump. Um, Getting out of sort of that safe, uh, conservative, not, well, I wouldn't say it's conservative. I would just say I came from Google and I went to GoFundMe. So that kind of
Yeah.
says it all.
Right. Big cloud company to nonprofit. That is a big
Yeah,
jump. Yeah.
yeah. And it felt like a risk. I think anytime you make a pay cut to pursue your passion, it's a risk, right? You're putting skin in the game. But one of the things that I talk about in my book is, I've realized that how we define prosperity is so much more than just the paycheck.
Right.
And so I feel like in a lot of ways, even though that may appear to be a risk, maybe that's how our culture defines it. I've gained so much more. And so it's pretty exciting. And I think there's a lot of times where we have to make those trade-offs. But if we're intentional about it, it can really be a level up, actually.
I love that. I love that. And then how do you balance the expectations of your executive role with also staying true to your values and identity?
I think that's a really great question. The first thing I would say is you need to be aware of what balance feels like. I think in a lot of ways, we we're constantly working for someone. We're constantly answering for someone. We constantly have deadlines, deliverables, um, KPIs, OKRs, results, results, results. And I think it's really important that we also include our own OKRs, uh, our own goals in that mix. And so I jokingly always tell people, when my husband and I decided to have children, I jokingly said, "Hey, I'm going to be taking some time to go after like my number one OKR right now, which is have a family."
Yeah.
Or, you know, I decided that one of my OKRs is to write this book.
Right.
And so your OKRs, and for some people who don't know what that is, it's a objective key result. There's a lot of books and articles about it, and it's really a framework that I believe came from Google uh, that folks use to measure results and goal setting. And I think all of that can apply to our lives as well. And it's really important that we invest in ourselves because when we start to feel like we're eroding or giving up the things that we very much want to do in our lives, whether that's health, whether that's passion projects, then it really does start to affect everything that you're doing at work. So it really is a balance.
Right. Right. I love that. I love that you're bringing this up because I just in the past week have had multiple conversations about this topic, which is that, the higher up on the ladder we get, the
Yeah,
busier we get, and the more likely we are to just give away, any focus on self and building that brand persona and presence and that leadership presence through the arc of our career. So many
yeah,
times what happens is people, they just kind of fall off the map. They just disappear from LinkedIn. Maybe they have a photo that's 5 or 10 years old, or they just started posting for a while and then they sort of got busy and then 6 months go by and it's just been crickets. And then it becomes harder, I think, to have credibility later because we haven't kept up that, expert and thought leader presence over time. And
yeah,
that's really differentiating is,
yeah.
being able to invest in that presence. One of the things I think it's helpful to remember is that it's also good for your company.
Yes.
Leaders, people trust people. And, when people start to do business with a company and they interact with a person, one of the first things they do is go connect on LinkedIn. And when that presence doesn't look great, it isn't your shining moment, or doesn't
Mhm.
help that, customer, partner, etc., feel like, you really are the leader you say you are and you're presenting yourself as, that can be a detriment to the company as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of times folks feel like being intentional is not being authentic. It's like, oh, whatever, I'm creating this thing. And I think you can absolutely do both, right? You don't have to feel like, you know, having that hygiene of keeping up, sharing like who your brand is, what you represent. I think of it as accountability. It's like
Right.
keeping me honest about who I am.
I love that because, I think one of the things that we journeyed through on the path to this role at GoFundMe was a number of different interviews and roles that were not unapologetically you for you. And it became clear, having a strong brand, I think, that, the handshake, something was off about the handshake. Can you
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's really easy to chase titles. It's really easy, and I struggle with that. American, born Chinese, grew up with Asian tiger parents. Like it was all about climbing the ladder and getting to the top. And I'm still working on that, because, I kind of say the top of the ladder for me is meaning. And
Wait,
so,
wait, wait. I'm going to stop you and say that again. That is really powerful. Say that the top of the ladder is meaning.
yeah, I mean it's kind of my new mantra, and it's one that's keeping me accountable, because the culture around us, the world around us, how I've been brought up is definitely not that. And so it's very much countercultural, but it's part of me. And I realized like, hey, if I'm going to live that out, I'm going to have to say it out loud. So that's another thing I would say is, by saying it out loud, by writing about it, I'm keeping myself accountable. Like I'm putting it out there that that is my aspiration. I'm not perfect. I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to slip it back into, old ways, but I am going to do this. And so I'm making a commitment to myself.
Yeah, the more you put yourself out there, in that sort of true to brand, unapologetically you, the more I think the true opportunities, the opportunities that are right for you, the more you slide into the life you actually want to be living.
Yeah.
I've always said, brand is a concrete expression of your intent in the
Hmm.
world, your intent about the impact you want to have, your intent about how you want to get there, and in your intent about what the quality of life you want to have.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
100%. So, what aspects of your personality and background have you intentionally woven into your leadership brand?
So coming from, it's interesting, I just posted an article about Virgil Abloh. He's, the late, fashion designer and creative director for Louis Vuitton. And I just was in New York and I had visited the Brooklyn Museum and found out, wow, he's also from Rockford, Illinois. And he also went to the same high school as I did.
Wow, that's a cool
And
discovery.
yeah, it was really interesting because I was thinking, hey, we're both, creative, and in my case, I've been focusing on emerging technology and all of that. And I grew up really in a very, I grew up as a sort of the immigrant kid. Again, I was born here, but my family immigrated here from Rockford, Illinois. And I was a bit of a nerd, growing up. It's so funny because everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, Alice, I love your style. I like want you to style me." And I was like, "Wait till I show you my childhood photos." Um, and so it's funny because I'm kind of turning this question on its head a little bit because I would arguably say if I told you my upbringing and my like where I grew up, you would never in a million years think, how did that lead you to what you're doing now and who you are now? And so I actually would want to say, and two-part question or two-part answer. On the
Okay.
one hand, my parents my drive, my grit, my perseverance, my work ethic, all of those things shaped who I am and led me to who I am today. So, like, I absolutely, give a huge shout out to my parents and frankly, all of the leaders in my life that have given me a shot. On the other hand, I say nothing from your background has to define who you are. Nothing, just because I came from humble beginnings and frankly had no sense of style, frankly had no aesthetic, frankly had no idea what art or taste or any of that was, um, you can you can make a way regardless of your past, present, or future.
I love that. I love that. I would say your brand evolves over time. As you grow, you learn, you change, you allow the world and your experiences to shape you as much as you are shaping them. And that's another reason I really love your phrase, make way. It's a very active participation in the world. I think we talked a little bit about the distinction between finding your next and
Yeah.
designing your next. And
Yep.
I think this is where we align. Being unapologetically you, I want to design my next, not just find my next.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of times that's leaning on your strengths. It's, one of my favorite books, and I know a lot of leaders, managers out there is the Clifton Strengths Finders book. It's
Yeah,
like such a small, short read, great tool for managing teams. And I think a lot of times we focus on what the feedback that someone gave us and we over rotate on that, and we're like spending 80% of our time fixing that when in reality we have multiple strengths and superpowers that really shine and show up because it's in your DNA, it's how
yes,
you operate. And
yeah,
so when you go into a workplace that has a certain culture or way of working, yes, we need to assimilate and adapt and understand and be flexible. But at the same time, we're not chucking our identity and who we are out the window.
right.
I'm a bit of an extrovert, talkative. People kind of say, oh, when Alice shows up in the room, you kind of you can hear her. And, sometimes that's good. And sometimes that can be, for introverts or others that are more calm, a little too much. But I go, you know what? That is who I am. I'm going to bring my energy at 7 in the morning because that's how I roll. And it's funny because my Gen Z teenagers often give me the eye roll, and call, I cringe is the term these days. Oh, mom, that's so cringe. When I bring my energy into the room. But I'm like, you know what? Be unapologetically you
Right.
at home, at work, wherever you are, and be respectful, of course, right? I'm not
Yes,
saying,
of course, of course. But
so.
don't, yes, respectful, of course, but I think this is where we find the people who appreciate our
Hmm.
strengths, our power, our personality, and
Yeah.
then we fit. What advice would you give executives who feel this pressure to fit in instead of standing out?
That's a great question, particularly because I feel like I've struggled with this myself throughout my, you know, 2 decade and a half career. Even saying that out loud, it's like, oh, is that like, am I going to get be judged for that? Like, are people going to think I'm old and not irrelevant? Like, even just some of the questions that we find ourselves asking,
Yeah.
that give us self-doubt, when in reality it's like, wait, I bring tons of experience. Like,
Right.
why would I doubt myself? But we do. Um, what I would say is when you find yourself in a moment where you're feeling this pressure to be someone else, to um, to step into the shoes of another person, remember that it is not their life that you're living, it is your life. And your life is on your own terms, which means you need to first know who you are.
Right.
I feel like part of it is actually doing the hard work of reflecting, journaling, assessing situations where, hey, someone said this to me. I'll give you an example. Someone said this to me, a former manager said this to me once that I was promoting my team too much. And I remember thinking when I heard that in my body, I was like, whoa, that just does not click with me.
Right.
Um, you need to promote yourself a little bit more. And maybe, sure, there's some truth to that, right? Like I see the nugget in that, and I always think, look, feedback is a gift. And so I try to look at it in both sides, but in my heart, I felt like it wasn't authentically me. And I said, you
Yeah,
know
and I
what?
and
I
I
just
love where
can't
you're
do that.
going with that. Yeah, I love where you're going with that. I think we can take feedback, and I think we can really sort of design, like, how do we want to respond to the feedback and remain authentic? So
Yeah.
I had a client I was working with. This is just, I think, a really good example who, despite being in the United States for, 15 or 20 years, has a relatively strong accent from her country of
Mm,
origin. She's bilingual, like
yeah.
fully bilingual. And what she said to me when we were chatting about her brand presence is that she felt like when she was interviewing or even when she was working with customers and partners, that she was being dinged for her accent,
Mm,
because maybe people perceived that she wasn't fully fluent or something along those lines. And so what we worked on was ways to own the narrative, which
yes.
is, hey, on first introduction, weave it into the conversation. I've gotten the feedback that I have a really strong accent, but I want to assure you I'm fully fluent in English. If I speak too fast or if I'm difficult to understand, I'm always happy to slow down. But
Yeah. Yeah.
like, turn it on its head and own the narrative. And in her resume, she was not talking at all about the strength of being bilingual. Own it,
Mm,
turn it on its head, put it right at the top. I'm
totally.
bilingual, I'm fully fluent in these two languages. So that any recruiter or hiring manager is just going to see that right on the top. So it's like a non starter.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think there are so many opportunities for leaders to do this, to sort of take charge of the conversation, and tell people how to think about you as opposed to waiting for
Right.
them to judge you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another thing to think about too, because believe it or not, we live in a world that's political. And for
Mhm.
somebody who, you know, it's like we all kind of have to learn how to navigate those waters. And so when you feel the pressure to conform, I think one thing we need to ask ourselves is what does that cost us when we feel like we are dimming our own light in trade off to maybe shining the light on someone else? Because sometimes we do that because we're people pleasing.
Right,
And I think that that takes some practice in navigating. And so we don't often
right,
ask, hey, if I do this, like, what is the cost to me
right,
long term? What is the ripple effect? And so often we look at our uniqueness, our differences, um, our ownable uh, attributes as liabilities, because the world has told us that, you know, you're not this, you need to be that. This is how we do things here. And I think there's some, like I said earlier, there's respect for that. But I think more, back to the topic of this podcast, we need to be unapologetically you. I think
yes,
I said that like, did I?
yeah,
Unapologetically you.
yes. Thank you. Alice, it's been such a treat to have you today. And like, you are really like one of my inspirations and icons for this topic, Unapologetically You. Cannot wait to have you bring your book to the market, make way. Looking forward to it. And thank you so much again for being on the podcast.